Welcome to another episode of The Colors of Prog, the show, the podcast, where I discuss progressive rock music and other kinds of music. This time, this is the Pink Floyd experience. That's what I decided to call it. So, I wasn't quite sure how to handle this, so I'm just going to go through the Pink Floyd albums. There's solo Roger Waters work, David Gilmour, Nick Mason. Now Nick Mason has his touring band doing Syd Barrett era music of Floyd. Even Richard Wright had solo works. So, I mean, for those uninitiated, Roger Waters and Nick Mason, the drummer, everybody knows who they are if you're watching this. They met in architecture school in the early 60s. Syd Barrett joined them in 64. He was another student in a different art school, and they regularly jammed on stage. Chris Dennis was the original singer of the band. Like, how many people knew that? They actually gigged with him, live shows, and then he joined the RAF. So Syd Barrett moved over to the vocal spot. He was already playing guitar. Rick Wright, joined a little later on. And so they're playing constantly. The Marquee Club, legendary R&B club in England. Stones played there. A lot of Yardbirds, a lot of big bands played there. Got their start there by gigging incessantly, increasingly playing to more and more people. Clubs were jammed for all of those bands. But Pink Floyd played to spare crowds at first, because while they were playing there, they're playing this wicked, psychedelicized R&B stuff, and I'm sure the crowds was more used to that rock and roll R&B sound that bands like the Stones were playing and filling that room, as opposed to the Floyd sound. But they still started to get a following. They moved on to the UFO Club, big kind of outre place. Art rock bands played there, Soft Machine. Quite a few of the early psychedelic hitters were there. Joe Boyd was a co-owner of that club. He later became well-known as a producer. He worked a lot with the Fairport Convention later on, Richard Thompson solo. So the music connections are all over the place. So anyway, Pink Floyd, they recorded 2 singles, See Emily Play and Arnold Lane. And those singles were doing pretty well, but they didn't really burn up the charts. So Joe Boyd got them into the studio with Norman Smith, who was an engineer at EMI. He worked on almost all the Beatles recordings up to Rubber Soul, produced a number of Pink Floyd's early works. But did you know that Norman Smith also had a pseudonym, Hurricane Smith? And in 1972, he had a #1 hit in the UK and in the US. Babe, What Would You Say? He kind of hit this he was older by then, so he hit this falsetto like Leo Sayer. Everybody remembers Leo Sayer, and it was a big hit. At the time that, I think it was mid to late 72, at the time this hit, there was nothing quite like that, so he had a hit. He went back to the studio, did a couple other things, and tinkered, and that's our little aside for that. So, Piper at the Gates of Dawn, your first Pink Floyd album. Pretty cool cover, huh? Psychedelic. You have Astronomy Divine on this, Lucifer Sam, Interstellar Overdrive. This is the first appearance of that on a Pink Floyd album. And, then it was Syd Barrett, Roger Waters, Richard Wright, and Nick Mason. And Richard Wright is the man who Roger Waters would later throw out of Pink Floyd, but only rehire him as a additional musician. Quite weird. So they're back to the UFO club. This record did chart. I mean, started to gain interest, but they went back to clubbing, touring. They started touring. Sid Barrett started to become unusual. The drug usage became heavier. This is well documented, so I'm not just coming up with this. And so they're wondering, the other band members, what are we going to do? We just had a record released, and we got to go back and play. But Sid's becoming a little less manageable as a musician and artist, co-worker. So they were thinking of bringing in an additional guitar player. And that was David Gilmour. This is true. So, almost like the Brian Jones Rolling Stones saga, where Brian Jones was still capable of playing, but started to tackle exotic instruments. So did Sid in a way. His songwriting became more childlike, for lack of a better word, and at the same time more psychedelic. Two very strange, one's over there, one's over there. Set the controls for The Heart of the Sun, which is a Roger Waters composition, is one of the highlights of here. A Saucerful of Secrets is on here as well. It's actually credited to Waters, Wright, Mason, and Gilmour. Oddly enough, there's only 7 songs on here, which doesn't really make it a short record. Some of the cuts are kind of long. And oddly enough, Jug Band Blues, solely credited to Sid Barrett, is not a country tune. It is a very psychedelic, out there kind of moment. So, were they both prog? In my eyes, no. They were both heavy psychedelic. Psychedelic blues, maybe not psychedelic blues in the vein of like 10 Years After and other bands like that ilk. Psychedelic blues like yearning, envy, love songs, the psychedelically blues style. Very bizarre, very strange. And Sid Barrett is no longer in the band and decided to do his own thing. So depending on what you read and who you talk to, or someone in the band or some self-professed Pink Floyd addict or journalist who really, really dug deep, I mean, we'll never know. There's all these different stories. Was he thrown out? Did he leave of his own accord? He recorded, we all know he recorded 2 albums, Barrett and the Madcap Laughs, which the band members helped on. And the results are some very hooky, childlike melodies wrapped up in a psychedelic stream. Very odd stuff. The band, Pink Floyd, without Barrett, now it's Waters, Wright, Gilmour, and Mason. They retreated to the studio and they wound up working on a whole bunch of different stuff. And the first appearance of Pink Floyd as a prog band, still with the psychedelic colors around it, is the Barbette Schroeder soundtrack to More, which starred Mimsy Farmer. For all you Italian genre film fans, Mimsy Farmer's in a couple of Italian thrillers at the time period. And this is a groovy kind of album. Does it have a recognizable hit in it? No, but it was something that the Pink Floyd fans really wanted at the time. It was more material. And it's pretty much all instrumental, besides some buried vocals that I can remember of this. Also has an album cover by Hypnosis, which is really cool, with that red negative thing going on there. Not a album, I think, that Pink Floyd fans up to then were really wanting. But band goes back into the studio and comes up with Ummagumma, or Ummagumma, your choice. Another great, great album cover. As you can see, the picture here, within the picture there, within the picture there, is different band members sitting around. There's Gilmour's at the forefront here, and there's Roger Waters. Really nice. So the first album on Ummagumma is a live recorded at a place called Mother's at the Birmingham and Manchester College of Commerce, June 1969. So this predates the work for Moore. They work on Astronomy to Mine, Barrett's song, Careful with That Axe, Eugene. Nice children's tale. Set the Controls for Heart of the Sun and Saucerful of Secrets. So 4 tunes over 2 long sides. The other album is stuff they've been just jamming on. I guess this material here is what they were working on in the studio while they're working on soundtracks, while they're planning to make a record. Richard Wright begins side 3 with Sisyphus, parts 1 through 4, which is nice that his composition leads off the first studio work attributed to Pink Floyd since Barrett's last album. Not just being Pink Floyd, there's some strange things here. Several species of small furry animals gathered together in a cave and grooving with a pick. It's the second song on side 3, and it's as bizarre as it sounds. This is the beginning of Pink Floyd's Prog era. Atom Heart Mother followed, and it's a bit of a oddity. It seems to be an unfinished work and more session material, if that could be a term, or session material for an album that never came to be. So Atom Heart Mother, I like it. It has a lot of fans, but at the same time, I think it's a work that's maybe one of these days we'll hear the sessions from that, or they may have already been released and I'm unaware of that. Every so often we get hit with 10 CD box set or 40 LP box set of this album, that album. It could have been released, I don't know. Someone could let me know. So the strange Meddle, which the cover art here is totally open for interpretation, is a bona fide studio album. You get that last guy in there. It has some great tracks on it. One of These Days comes from this. Fearless. Echoes. Just truly, truly a mind-blowing album. Definitely heavy prog. This is the blueprint, if you say, if I could say, the blueprint, if you will, for a lot of the Italian prog bands that were around 71, 72 period, that were becoming heavily influenced by British music, especially British prog. And there's some great tracks on here. Obscured by Clouds, also known as The Valley, is another strange Barrett Schroeder film. I kid you not, right? It's like that goes hand in hand. Barrett Schroeder, strange. People might know Barrett Schroeder is the director of Barfly and a few other films of note. Very outre filmmaker. So it's funny. I read in the Nick Mason autobiography that some of the band members weren't crazy about Barrett Schroeder and his habit of the band presenting a number of tracks to him for the soundtrack, and him choosing tracks he were thrilled with, and or tracks they'd rather go back into the studio and work on some more, elaborate more on. That being said, it's a very good proggy. It's like one of those symphonic prog albums. It just lays over you. I don't believe there are any song tracks on, any vocals on that. So next, big surprise, Dark Side of the Moon. Probably to whom you're speaking, to what you're reading, it's in the top 100, top 50, top 10, top 5, top 3, top 20 greatest albums of all time by period, right? It's just incredible. So where did this come from? The stories vary. Recorded in Abbey Road, of all places, where the Beatles used to work quite a lot in their later years, and where they recorded Let It Be, the final work, and Abbey Road. It's recorded in summer of 72 up to the winter of 73. So influenced by stuff going on with Syd Barrett a few years later, only about 2 years earlier, only about 2 years earlier, were they even dealing with Barrett and his psychedelic-sized brain exploding and having to bring Gilmour in. And so 2 to 3 years later, they were in the studio just recording this mind-blowing stuff. Definitely. There are prog bands that have done their version of these songs. Prog bands have done Dark Side of the Moon. There have been prog tributes to Dark Side of the Moon. A lot of you guys know this already. You could just Google Dark Side of the Moon tribute, Pink Floyd tribute, this stuff. How many years ago is this? A long time ago. 50-something years ago. And, or just about. And, pardon me, every song everybody knows, Speak to Me, Breathe, On the Run, Time, Great Gig in the Sky, Money, Us and Them, Eclipse, so on and so forth. Brilliant record. I don't need to tell you something you already know. Claire Torrey and Doris Troy and others, and Doris people know from working with the Stones as well, all just contribute to one of the great albums of all time. I can't even begin to add to this. So they follow that up 2 years later, because that's a monster. 1975, Wish You Were Here. A really strange album, keeping within the framework of Dark Side of the Moon. We have more thoughts back to Syd Barrett. And this is the original legendary cover, because it came in a black bag when first released, and if you did not get it upon its initial release, and it came in more hypnosis cardboard sleeves. There are songs on this that make this a tribute to Syd Barrett. The legend is that while they were recording this album, Syd stopped by the studio. I say legend because some stories say, well, Syd was all but unrecognizable now. He'd put on a sizable amount of weight, or just was disheveled appearance. I don't know. I can't speak to that. I wasn't there. There are naysayers that says not true. He's just the older Syd, shows up late 74, 75, watching the band play. His old band he co-created. Welcome to the Machine, Have a Cigar, Wish You Were Here. Just a great album. And again, another addition to that prog progressive rock pantheon of material. Although I haven't seen too many prog bands or artists cover Wish You Were Here, and the material on there, like I mentioned with Dark Side of the Moon, it's certainly something I may have missed. So now we're on a track of every 2 years, pretty much. So Animals. Pretty much the majority of this has been composed by Roger Waters, except for Dogs. You have Pigs on the Wing, Dogs, Pigs, 3 different ones, Sheep, Pigs on the Wing Part 2. The thing about this album, Roger Waters' very political beliefs come to the forefront of his songwriting. When this first came out, it just bugged people out because it was this heavy rock album with a progressive rock atmosphere with these heavily veiled lyrics about politics. I think these were the Margaret Thatcher years. I could be corrected if I'm wrong. And it was just, it blew people's minds. You had a triumvirate. You had Dark Side, which was different from Wish You Were Here, and then you had the heavy, heavy Animals. No pun intended. Pigs, animals. So, where do you go from there? We just went deeper. The Wall. A mind-boggling 2-album set, which became a mind-boggling film. So, Roger Waters now enforcing his power as the bona fide chief songwriter for the band, he decided to come up with a theme record. He decided to write about him growing up in World War II ruins of England, going to school, dealing with parents who their lives have been torn asunder by the war, and just how rough it is. And surprisingly, so you're talking about 1979. Punk has come and hit. The new wave has come and hit. The old heavy rock sound of the big stars are a bit on the wane because they got that jolt. I mean, it'll be, pardon me, Some Girls Stones just came out 78, 79, around this period. But Led Zeppelin's last album was 1979, I believe, In Through the Outdoor. Last studio album. So a lot of those rock dinosaurs were just, everybody was hit hard by punk and new wave. So you got this, a concept album about growing up in World War II. It was huge. It was heavy. It's still very heavy to listen to, but it's gorgeously produced. James Guthrie and Bob Ezrin. Bob Ezrin works with Deep Purple, by the way, as well. They just did a wonderful job. The strangest stuff. Is it prog? Yes, I would have to say. Probably more so than the Final Cut. 4 years later, Roger Waters has decided he hasn't said enough about growing up in post-war England. So now he's going to write another rock opera, let's say, for lack of a better term, a concept album about the post-war dream and the collapse of it. So, a great many people dislike the final cut, and lately it's been re-embraced. It has very militaristic themes for a person who's anti-war, I believe, as being Waters. The thing that's odd about this is that something happened during the Wall recording. You're recording for the album The Wall and for the soundtrack for the film, and then they went back in and they recorded their own version of the soundtrack because they didn't like the mix done by Alan Parker, the director, and his team. Roger Waters threw Rick Wright out of the band and reduced him to a side musician or touring musician, and he still stayed with the band. That's a rough thing. It's sort of, those familiar with rock and roll history in general, Ian Stewart, the truck driver looking dude, one of the best boogie and barrel house piano players you'll ever hear, and his work definitely speaks for him, was a member of the Rolling Stones. And when Andrew Lou Goldham came, he said, "This guy looks like a truck driver. He's not in the band." Those were the childhood friends of Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. He stayed. He toured with them pretty much until he died. He also appeared in the studio working on a lot of tracks. So in a way, Rick Wright stayed with the band, but it's very evident if you look on the back, performed by Pink Floyd, David Gilmour, Nick Mason, Roger Waters. Then there's a list of people who work on the album. Michael Kamen, people know him from working on the Lethal Weapon films. Ray Cooper, Andy Newmark. You can't find Richard Wright's name on here. So meanwhile, Richard Wright did do solo work. Nick Mason did solo album. Gilmour was working on his solo work, and Roger Waters is working on his solo work. Band splinters. I think a lot of it had to do with the Richard Wright situation. And there was no new Pink Floyd. That was pretty much the last Pink Floyd album as we know it, the band to have existed. And so what happened is Gilmour, Nick Mason, Wright team up, and it's time for Pink Floyd. So Roger Waters wanted to sue his former bandmates, saying, "You can't make a Pink Floyd album because I'm not in the band anymore." This went back and forth, and through some legal chicanery, it got sorted out. And we have a momentary lapse of reason, which is a apropos name for an album which explains what's going on. Strange thing here is now that David Gilmour is pretty much leading Pink Floyd now, the album, again co-produced by Bob Ezrin, has David Gilmour, Nick Mason, Richard Wright, as it should be. And Bob Ezrin's been kind of promoted up to status of second keyboardist. Interesting thing is, how many people know that on the studio sessions, Tony Levin is the bass player in Pink Floyd? Yeah, Tony Levin, King Crimson, later on like 500,000 bands on the face of the earth. So that some of that great bass playing on this is Tony Levin. It's sort of like Roger who? No, I'm kidding. I love Roger. I saw one of his last tours. I'll mention David stuff and Nick and Richard and Roger stuff and other shows. I'm not going to do a whole thing. I might pop up now and then. So a few years later, the final version of the final recording from the David Gilmour version of Pink Floyd is Division Bell. Very nice record. I actually prefer Momentary Lapse of Reason myself. It's that same kind of sound. as that previous record. It sounds like a really good Gilmour solo album more than it does a Pink Floyd album. But at the same time, it's what we have to work with. Pulse was the tour after this. One aside, and this was 94, so one aside was that in 2005, everyone was hoping for a Pink Floyd reunion. Everybody. Well, you were. And I was. And there was Live Aid. Didn't happen. There were a couple other those big giant festivals where bands got together, contributed their time and performances for a good cause. Live 8 in 2005 was one such thing. They did a 30 to 40 minute performance. And you had Pink Floyd, the way it should have been. It was nice to see. Hasn't happened again yet. Apparently, David Gilmour is the one saying never. And Roger Waters says never. And never say never. So, there was a Pulse, I believe. Did I mention that? Pulse was a multi-disc set from the Division Bell tour. Nice live recording. Then we had, to this day, a very strange album attributed to Pink Floyd called The Endless River. It was co-produced by David Gilmour and Phil Manzanera from Roxy Music and a lot of other bands. And Phil has worked with David Gilmour on a lot of his work, his albums, and Phil's played with David Gilmour on his solo tours. And he joined him as a co-guitarist and co-keyboardist on this, along with Nick Mason. Sorry, I didn't mention Nick. What we had here is Richard Wright had passed away, and he was ill, and Gilmour realized he came upon these recordings. Some are snippets and some are long pieces, and he said, if I edit these together into songs, it could be not only a tribute. To him, it was the end of Pink Floyd as he knew it. So that's what The Endless River is. This is the dividing record amongst Pink Floyd fans, and probably one as well amongst Prog fans. It's very solemn. It's also very not finished, like life is. And I guess that was part of the idea. If they sound like unfinished songs, and they tried to complete unfinished songs and make them songs, maybe life itself is incomplete. It has a beautiful picture in the gatefold. Nick Mason, Gilmour, and everybody else. So, 33 minutes of Pink Floyd. It was a Pink Floyd experience. I didn't say anything new, but it was my little history and just going over, reviewing some of the, pretty much all of the Pink Floyd albums that matter. If I missed something, let me know. So again, I hope you have a great day. The spring is finally here. Be well.